G'day. A blatant attempt to undermine the will of Parliament. That's what the Deputy Commissioner of the Tax Office, Mark Conza, said a few days ago, because one of the big four audit firms, one of the big four accounting firms, had cooked up this scheme in order to get round the latest set of government laws regarding multinational tax avoidance. These things are called the Multinational Anti-Avoidance Legislation, MAL, M-A-A-L. And the whole purpose of these laws is to stop people like Google and eBay, Uber for that matter, any of these American digital companies from siphoning all their profits offshore. And the way they do this is they pretend they don't even have a business here in Australia. They pretend this business is from Zurich in Switzerland or from Singapore. And so they bill you from there and all the profits go offshore and they don't even pay GST either. So the MAL legislation was brought in. The purpose of it is to stop this happening. And has it worked? Well, no sooner had it come in than the big four accounting firms were working out a way to subvert it, to undermine the will of Parliament. And Conza got right onto this, and this is a good thing to see from our public officials, because they've been too timid before. They've been too close to the big four audit firms. The big four audit firms are the architects, the engineers globally of multinational tax avoidance. And this latest scam was effectively to set up partnerships instead of companies and let 1% only of the profits from the partnership go to the Australian partner in the partnership and the rest of the profits to go to the offshore partner in a tax haven somewhere. So this is the latest thing these guys had cooked up, and Conza was right onto them. Now the other thing lately is that we've been having a look at these 1,579 companies that have been forced to disclose, the big foreign multinationals and big Australian private companies and so on, their tax position and their revenues and expenses and so on. Now what really shines through in all this information, there's two things which come through. One is that the expenses of a lot of these companies are sky high, like above 90%. More than half of them are above 90% expenses to revenue. Now the good thing about having high expenses if you're a multinational is that they're tax deductible. But the issue here is, are these companies actually sending work offshore? Are they offshoring this work, government contracts in many cases, and then claiming tax deduction on the work that's offshored? Because it certainly seems to be the case. Now we called IBM this week, we called IBM last week in fact, they still hadn't got back to us. These guys looked after the census, which was a debacle, as everybody knows. Now they're not saying whether they offshored that work, but let's say they did offshore that work because they sacked 1,500 people a little while ago, 2 years ago, they sacked 1,500 people. So the question is, these taxpayer gigs, billions of dollars going to multinational companies from our government in contracts, is this going to offshore work on which tax deductions are claimed, but for which of course the workers offshore, they're not paying income tax to our government, they're paying income tax to, some country in Asia. That's one aspect of this set of figures. The other aspect is 579 out of 1,500 companies paid zero tax, no tax at all. But the interesting thing was the level of the profits, very small profits all round, because the whole caper is not producing a profit, it's eliminating the profit, because if you create a profit, you have to pay tax on it. This shows a pattern, a deliberate pattern, all promoted by big four accounting firm schemes and so on. There's a definite pattern towards these multinational companies making very little profit in Australia and therefore having to pay very little tax. Now, what do we do about this? Well, unless the government can find better ways to enforce the present laws, Part 4A, on the intent of the Tax Act, that transactions should not be tax driven, but they should be commercially driven, really, we're going to have to start looking at taxing revenue, because at least when you tax revenue, the revenue comes in, it's very hard to hide it, and then you just tax it at a much lower rate than profits. And that stops people eliminating their profits and paying no tax. So we now have to discuss that option of whether we tax revenue. This might be unfair, but many of these aren't paying any tax anyway. So over the next year or two, you can expect more calls from people around the world, in fact, as well, to look at revenue taxes rather than taxes on profit.